Chapter 13, The Farnhams and the Wheatleys. The Royal Charity Concert at the Sydney Opera House on Tuesday, 27th of May 1980 was a really big historical moment. It was Australia's first Royal Charity Concert, and it was an extremely big deal to perform in front of Queen Elizabeth II and her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. Some huge stars and incredible Australian performers were part of the lineup, including Olivia Newton-John, Paul Hogan, Peter Allen and Helen Reddy. The whole show was going to be aired simultaneously on Channel 9. Bert Newton was hosting at the time. I was an unsigned has-been. I hadn't released a record in years. I hadn't been doing much at all. So when the call came asking me to sing at the concert, it was completely out of the blue. I was gobsmacked. To be considered a peer to those performers was an honour for me, and I delightedly accepted. Until, that is, I found out what they wanted me to sing. The concert was going to be broadcast live around the nation, and the producer and director, Peter Feynman, was the golden boy of television. He would go on to direct Crocodile Dundee, which became the highest-grossing Australian film of all time. Peter was also the producer and director of The Don Lane Show, and there's no doubt in my mind that it was this connection that got me the gig. On Don's show, I would pretty much sing whatever they wanted me to sing, so they probably weren't expecting that to change. But when Peter asked me to sing Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree for the Royal Charity Concert, I wasn't happy. I didn't want to sing that song. I was grateful for the opportunity, but in my mind, Tie a Yellow Ribbon wasn't going to help me reclaim my credibility, and I told Peter that. I said, I've got a version of the Beatles' Help that I'd like to sing instead. And Peter and the other producers weren't convinced. I knew in my heart that my version of Help was as good as I could do at that time. I knew I could sing it in tune, and I knew I could sing it strongly. It's a great song and a great lyric, and for once I was presenting my idea firmly, and I believed in it. Peter doubled down and said, no, we want you to do Tie a Yellow Ribbon. So I said, fair enough, I won't do the show. I held my ground. To Peter's credit, he was terrific, and he compromised and said, OK, do both songs. And I agreed. At the first rehearsal, I went out there and sang his song first, but I kept forgetting the lyrics. I didn't do it on purpose, I promise you. The words just wouldn't come to me. I sang, oh, tie a yellow ribbon, oh, yellow ribbon, yellow ribbon. I just sang that for the entire song with Tommy Tico and a 60-piece orchestra backing me. Then it was time for me to perform Help. I remembered the words and sang it as best I could. People liked it. They let me know they got what I was trying to do. And at the end of the rehearsal, Peter Feynman came up to me and said, you were right and I was wrong. So, on the big night, I went out there and I sang my arrangement of Help. The reaction to my performance was wonderful. It felt good to have backed myself and my instinct, something I hadn't done for a long time. I met the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh after the show, and yet Peter's words, his acknowledgement that I was right, were just as memorable. So few people had ever said those words to me in a professional context, and I couldn't have been more grateful. That was the cherry on top of an amazing night. A record-breaking 6 million people tuned into the concert broadcast that screened live around Australia. It was repeated not long after and drew in even more viewers. So doing that song helped show people that I was capable of more than singing ditties and show tunes. It was early days, but it felt like things might be changing. And then Glenn Wheatley came good on his promise to do an album with me. From that moment, things really started to change for the better. I was ready to be guided, and Glenn was a great guide. We got on really well. We were friends first, and so we understood each other. Glenn had an understanding of the music business that I didn't have. He also had a handle on the demands of business in general, whereas I didn't know anything about finances. I've got no idea. That's why I have accountants and lawyers and various people to help me. Most did, though some, like Darryl, helped themselves. In this business, money can come very quickly, and it can go away just as quickly. Once Glenn was managing me, he made sure I had the people I needed to support me and start afresh. Glenn introduced me to Liam Hayes, who was LRB's accountant. I spoke to him a few times, and like the man, I trusted him and we got on really well, so I hired him. We still get on, and he's still my accountant today. It was the same with lawyer Ken Stark. I chatted with Ken and trusted him, so he took over all legal work I needed done. He's still my lawyer today. It's been a long partnership now, over 40 years or so, and Liam and Ken often work as a team on my behalf. I hear from Liam, I hear from Ken, then between the three of us we work things through. I have a lot of respect and love for both of them. They're terrific blokes, and they've helped me very much. To do my first album in 5 years, Glenn connected me with Graham Govell. Graham was one of the founders and main songwriters of the Little River Band, and he was very keen to produce an album with me. Graham really liked the way I sang, which was very nice to hear. He also had huge international recognition for his work because he wrote many of the LRV's hits. What I didn't realise at the time was that Graham liked to be in complete control. To me, it seemed that he was a sculptor, and I was going to be his clay. Over the years, people had sent me songs. I collected them all, listened to them, and marked the ones I liked. I played my picks to Graham as potential tracks for the album. Graham rejected all of them. I tried many times to sit down and write my own songs, and what came from that were absolute turds. One song idea I had was to use all the derogatory terms for unscrupulous people I'd met in my career, terms like crooked as a dog's hind leg, full as a boot, and so on, then string them together to create a song. I've still got that creation somewhere. Yeah, it is as bad as it sounds. One song I wrote that I was proud of was Jilly's song. I was sitting at that old pianola Jill had given me, tinkering away, thinking about loving her, and the song came out of me. Now, I'm not going to sing the song because I will fucking cry. I only ever tried to sing Jilly's song once on stage. During one of the early Whispering Jack concerts, I put it on the set list, but I burst into tears halfway through and couldn't finish it. What a sook. I never tried to sing it on stage again. I sang it for Graham to see whether we should include it on the album. He liked it and got a co-writing credit for giving it the thumbs up. I also played Graham my arrangement of Help. He liked that too, and it was included on the album, but he didn't seek a co-writing credit for that one. The rest of the songs on the album were Graham's songs. In the end, Graham ended up writing, or co-writing, 9 of the 10 tracks of the album. He convinced me his songs were better, and to be fair, some of them were, but what that meant was I was essentially singing someone else's album, and that someone was Graham. We recorded the album in 3 weeks, and for the first time in my career, I was part of the whole process. A lot of guys who played with LRV came into the studio and played on the album. It was nice to get to know them. I was more comfortable being in the studio than I ever had been before, because I largely liked the material I was recording. I was finally recording music that was contemporary. I laid down my vocals in 3 days, and it was a learning experience, I can tell you. But despite being comfortable in the studio, I still felt paranoid about being in the recording booth, and recording the Uncovered album pushed that paranoia to the next level. I fell into that old trap again. I didn't back myself. I should have told Graham, I'm not singing these songs for you, I'm singing them for me, and I'm going to sing them my way. But I didn't. When I realised most of the songs were in a key that was too high for me, I didn't say anything. I kept quiet and sang the songs the way Graham Govell wanted me to. He had the experience and the runs on the board, so I accepted he knew best. I had a good time making the record and was happy to put it out to the world. It was only later that I could see I should have backed myself and been more assertive. The album was done, but none of the record labels wanted to sign me. Glenn shopped it around and no one was interested, so he finally decided to release the album on his own label, Wheatley Records. Eventually, Glenn did a deal with RCA to distribute the album, and it did okay. It eventually went gold, which was awarded after 20,000 album sales, but more importantly, it gave me an opportunity to perform new music live. Glenn helped me put together the Farnhams band to tour Uncovered. It was a good band. It was a fucking good band. But I know a couple of the musicians felt a bit sorry for themselves because they were working with me, a lead singer who didn't have any credibility. I was determined to prove them and all the naysayers wrong. The first couple of gigs tanked. The old audience didn't know how to take the new material, and the new audience didn't know how to take the new me. It didn't help that in one of those very early gigs, I worked hungover. I had the worst hangover. I think the stress, strain and enormity of the situation got the better of me because I got shockingly pissed the night before. I was throwing up before the concert, and I'd never in my career done that before. I reckon I was still drunk when I went on stage. My mate, Jimmy McCormick, was at that show, and he came backstage with his girlfriend after the gig. He was a funny guy, Jimmy. He used to go out with my sister, Jeannie Jamroll, and even when they stopped going out, Jimmy and I remained friends. That night he looked at me, grabbed my hand, pumped my fist and said, "We're rich butters." He always called me Butters. It was his way of telling me he liked the show. He was a lovely man, and to have a friend like Jimmy's approval was a big relief. I guess the hangover didn't impact my performance too much, but I never overdid the booze before a show, ever again. I still wasn't getting any radio airplay. Even though I wasn't singing Sadie and Raindrops or Underneath the Arches anymore, I couldn't shake the stigma of those songs. Despite all that, I was 10 steps ahead of where I'd been and what I'd been doing in the Leaks clubs, so that was a positive. I had nothing to lose, so we just kept going. Prior to touring Uncovered, the technology available at my gigs meant whatever I sang was amplified over the PA. You heard what you heard, and that was that. I mean, I didn't even like the pianos. It was crazy. But on this tour, for the first time in my career, I had my own soundbox, my own wedge right in front of me. A wedge is a speaker monitor that's on stage so performers can hear themselves and how they sound. I could hear myself sing. I couldn't believe it. The roadies put this stuff on stage just for me. It was amazing. That tour made me appreciate the effort and input of the roadies. They do all the hard work and the musicians get all the glory. Before that tour, I'd never thought much about that. I'd look up at the stage and all the gear was there and everything was under lights, but I didn't appreciate the effort that goes into preparing it all. It's impossible to do an impressive show without them. Can you imagine? The big shows would never happen without them. No way. It's incredible all the work they do. And after that run of shows, I finally understood what the roadies go through and valued that work much more. The band and I, we all mucked in and helped each other loading in and loading out. We all pulled our weight, but I have to dip my lid to all the roadies out there. Thanks, guys and girls. Slowly, word spread. People started coming to gigs and I started enjoying myself. I was loving playing with a good band and I felt really supportive to get out there and sing. We had some great times on that tour. And in Perth, I bumped into the Australian men's cricket team. This was the era when Aussie cricketers were idolised. Everyone thought of them as gods. We were staying at the same hotel, and one night we were all having a drink together. Everyone started getting pretty raucous. Rod Marsh, the Australian wicketkeeper, was a short bloke, but he was built like a brick shithouse. And as the night went on, he picked me up with one hand, put me on a table and said, "Sing." So I did what I was told. I sang Help, and all the cricketers sang along with me, which was really, really nice. After that night, I got to know Marshy and the legendary fast bowler Dennis Lilly pretty well. They were really great guys, absolute heroes, and it was fantastic to spend time with them. I really have been very lucky in meeting the people I have and getting to know people with some incredible talent at the top of their field in whatever they do. Speaking about the best of the best, with respect to every other singer on the planet, I think Stevie Wonder's the greatest singer who ever lived, for all different reasons. The facility in his voice is scary, seriously scary. I love the way he sings, the way he plays, the way he moves around a song. Melisma is the technical term for tricky singing, and it's everywhere now. Everyone and his dog are trying to do it, including me. Perhaps a little too much, though. But in my mind, Stevie was the first person to make it really popular. I was still promoting the Uncovered album when Glenn called me and said, "Do you want to tour with Stevie Wonder?" Do I what? Obviously, I jumped at the chance to tour with my favourite singer of all time. I would have paid money to have been on that tour. I didn't tell Glenn that, though. Stevie and I toured Australia together. It was a huge boost when he told me he liked my voice and my singing. The man also has the best sense of humour. At one point on the tour, he was walking behind one of his guides with his hand on the guide's shoulder, and I was behind Stevie with my hand on his shoulder. We were being led around the stage. When we were in place, the first song started up. I sang a little bit, and then I went to hand the microphone to Stevie so he could take over. He completely ignored it. We all stopped, and I said, "I tried to hand you the microphone. Didn't you see it?" The whole crowd went deadly silent. Could have had a pin drop. Stevie took his time responding, and finally he turned around and said, "Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking that way," which absolutely killed the audience. They loved it. Everyone cracked up laughing, including me. Stevie's crew were also very kind and were very vocal in their admiration for me and the band. They used to stand at the side of the stage and watch my set, which was lovely because usually, 90% of the time, the other bands and crews on a lineup don't hang around and watch. They usually go about their business or take a quick rest before their own set. But not Stevie's people. They were always watching from the side of the stage, and I was honoured that they took the time. Apart from being the most incredible singer in the universe, Stevie was a lovely man and an absolute gentleman. Jilly was pregnant at the time with Robert, quite pregnant. The first time they met, Stevie said, "May I?" And Jill said, "Of course." He got down on his knees, rubbed her belly, then sang "My Cherie Amour" to her bump. It was beautiful. I would be very surprised if there's a singer on the planet who doesn't admire what Stevie does. A musician of any kind, actually. You can't knock talent like that. And because Stevie was so kind to me and because his team was so kind also, it really gave me a bit more credibility in people's eyes, which I desperately needed, I have to say. It took Gillian and I a long time to have kids. We started trying for children as soon as we got married, but for whatever reason, and nothing to do with that cat, it just didn't happen. Jill's tough, she's strong, and yet every Christmas I'd find her sitting on the couch, quietly sobbing, and I'd say, "What's wrong, love?" And she'd sob and say, "I just want a baby." It was heartbreaking. Jill desperately wanted to be a mum, and I desperately wanted to be a dad. After so long with nothing happening, it seemed our dreams of a family weren't going to happen easily. So we decided to adopt. The adoption process in Australia back then was very difficult, and we were told that if we took in a child and then Jill got pregnant, they would take the adopted child away from us. We knew that giving away a baby we loved would have devastated us both. So we went with an agency that helped Australian families adopt Indian children. We got 99% of the way through the adoption paperwork and were close to having a child placed with us when Jill found out she was pregnant. It was a wonderful moment, but we then had to decide whether we should continue with the adoption process as well. It was something we really agonised over, but in the end, we decided not to proceed, and Jill focused on looking after herself during her pregnancy. In 1981, after so long wanting and dreaming of having children, it was finally happening. It was September when Jill went into labour. She said to me, "John, we got to go to the hospital now." I was ready because in the weeks leading up to the big day, she'd had me practicing driving to the hospital and back with her in the passenger seat. She was worried about my non-existent sense of direction. I didn't want to blow it, but of course I did. I was panicking, and Jill was giving me directions while having contractions. Anyway, we got there safely, fortunately, and the nurses were fantastic, although possibly they were as worried about me as they were about Jill. I was an absolute mess. I was beside myself. And the nurses said, "Now, John, be aware that some women swear when they're having a baby." And to tell you the truth, Jill can be descriptive sometimes. She has a marvellous vocabulary, particularly when it comes to expletives. So I was expecting all the colourful language, but Jill didn't say boo. She gave birth to our beautiful baby boy and did not say boo. She was unbelievable, and I was nearly fainting with adoration, with joy, with every conceivable reaction you can have to watching the love of your life give birth. We named our first son Robert. 8 years later, we were blessed again when Jill fell pregnant and we gave Robert a little brother. We named him James. It's just amazing, and we're very lucky. They're both great blokes, and I'm very proud of both of them. We all have our foibles, and we all make mistakes. Sorry about the bare bum Vaseline, Rob. But they're good lads, and I like them a lot as people. My family is everything to me. As I've said, meeting and marrying Jill was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I was really happy when one night Glenn Wheatley raced over to me, grabbed my arm and said, "I think I found the one." Glenn was my manager, but first and foremost, we were mates. I loved the man like a brother. So when he told me he thought he'd found the one for him, I took notice. The Farnham band and I were working at the opening of Billboard nightclub in Melbourne, which Glenn part-owned. It was packed, absolutely packed. And after the show, when Glenn raced over, I looked to where he was pointing and said, "Oh, yeah. Oh, you found the one all right. She's lovely. She's gorgeous. She's absolutely beautiful." Glenn was pointing at Gaynor Martin, who was a successful actor on the hugely popular soap opera Skyways. Glenn was right. She was the one. Glenn and Gaynor got married in the Collins Street Uniting Church in Melbourne. The wedding featured in the Australian Women's Weekly. Remember, Gaynor was a big TV star, and I was the best man alongside Glenn's brother Paul and Glenn Shorrock, the lead singer of LRB. Since that fateful night at Billboard, Glenn, Gaynor, Jill and I have always been very close. The four of us have spent a lot of time together. We travelled together fairly regularly when we didn't have the kids. And when our kids came along, we continued travelling together. The Farnhams and the Wheatleys are family. I loved us being all together, bringing up our kids together. Glenn and Gaynor had a holiday house next door to us in Port Douglas. We'd all go up there for holidays, and I would teach all the kids to ride bikes and fly kites, while Glenn was facing around doing million-dollar deals as an entrepreneur. It was really funny. He'd come out in the sunshine after being on the phone and tied to the fax machine for hours, and he'd say, "Where are the kids?" I'd have him down the beach flying a kite.